on Eye on Northwest Politics. A session finished, but leaving unfinished business. Oregon lawmakers failed to pass a transportation bill, leading to possible cuts and layoffs at ODOT. Is a special session on the way? I sit down with the Deputy Senate Majority Leader, Wlnsvey Campos of Aloha, and House Republican Leader Christine Drazen of Canby to recap the session. Plus, as legislators approved the largest K-12 budget in Oregon history, an early childhood education advocate says the funding leaves the youngest students vulnerable.
But I have to say, to truly yield the ROI that we want to see, those investments are insufficient.
Eye on Northwest Politics starts now. Thanks for joining us. This is Eye on Northwest Politics. I'm Ken Boddy. Let's get right to your top political headlines. The state of Oregon moving ahead with the lowest minimum wage increase in a decade. It raised the minimum wage by 2.4%. In Portland, that means the minimum wage is rising 35 cents, going from $15.95 an hour to $16.30 an hour. And it will cost you more to get an Uber or a Lyft in the city of Portland. The city just raised rideshare fees from 65 cents per ride to $2 a ride. That's expected to generate about $10 million for transportation maintenance and improvements. The city is also hiking fees on downtown parking and raising greens fees at city-owned golf courses. Oregon legislators wrapped up the 83rd legislative session last week with some notable successes, especially in education funding, but also a notable disappointment in not passing a transportation bill. So did last week's sine die really signal the end of the legislature's work, or was it just a pause in the action? Deputy Senate Majority Leader Wlnsvey Campos is here to help us wrap our heads around what happened in Salem. A former homeless shelter caseworker and political organizer for the Oregon Nurses Association, Senator Campos is a Democrat who represents Aloha and Beaverton in Senate District 18. And when she was elected in 2022, she was the youngest state senator in Oregon history at age 26. Senator Campos, welcome to Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here.
Well, Governor Kotek is threatening to call a special session after House Bill 2025, the $12 billion transportation funding bill, died. Are you in favor of a special session?
Well, I won't speculate as to whether or not there's going to be a special session. I will say that if one is called, we are at the ready to get to work. But I do believe that these conversations are ones that need a lot of engagement and collaboration with a number of different partners. And we really need to be thoughtful about an issue that really impacts everyone across the state.
What happened with the transportation bill? Why did it go down?
Well, it's a big bill. It requires, as I mentioned, a lot of engagement. It requires a good amount of time, and it didn't pass. We're ready to keep working on it, but sometimes conversations this grand, again, that impact folks across the state need some more conversations to happen.
Well, much of the opposition from Republicans especially had to do with the increases in taxes, like the gas tax and fees associated with the measure. How do you respond to that, the revenue-raising portion of the measure that a lot of people had objections to?
Absolutely, there were some criticisms around the cost of the package, but what we, I think, really need to understand is that the cost of not doing anything is greater. For decades, we have had a lack of investment in our roads, in our bridges. Let me tell you about just last year, I was out in Dundee, ended up with a flat tire because of a sneaky pothole. Actually, I ended up with two flat tires. It caught both tires on the right side of my car. That ended up being about $500 to replace both tires. It ended up meaning that the next day of work, I had to miss work. And that is a story that for a number of folks would be detrimental, right? $500 that couldn't be used for groceries, missed work that could mean the possibility that they would lose their job. So when we think about the cost of not repairing our roads or not investing in transit that we know so many folks rely on to get to work, to take their kids to, it's really time that we do something. And that's what we're trying to do with this transportation package, is to make sure that we're maintaining our roads so that folks can get to school, that they can get to work, and that they can feel safe to do so.
ODOT claims that it may have to eliminate hundreds of jobs and that road maintenance and infrastructure, like you've been mentioning, will suffer. Transit agencies were struggling and counting on some of that revenue. So where do we go from here without having that package in place?
Well, we did look at a stopgap measure. As you know, that did not come to fruition. So we have to continue the conversations with our counties, with our cities, to find what the solution is moving forward.
One of the successes, though, a record $11.4 billion for K-12 education. That was mostly through Senate Bill 141, the appropriation to the state school fund. That was one of the governor's priorities. So what does this bill, the passage of this, do for education in the state?
Well, education is an absolute priority for legislators. We want to make sure that we are investing in our youth. We talk a lot about the importance of upstream investments. And so we want to make sure that students have access to, class days that aren't shortened, access to the amount of educators that folks need in the classroom. I want to say that one of the things that we're really proud of too, with education this past legislative session, is some of the accountability that we have heard folks asking for. We want to make sure that we know where funds are going, and that we're collaborative with our local school boards, our partners, that educators are part of the conversation too, and that we're doing everything that we can for both educators and our students.
And that was one of the things that was talked about quite a bit in the legislative session, was accountability, especially in terms of educational results. So how can you make sure that the money going to education is being used effectively to educate the students?
Well, we want to make sure that the through line with the with the Oregon Department of Education, that is strong, that the communication there is ongoing, that we're connecting with our local school boards, that we're getting report backs on how funds are being spent.
Housing was another big issue. House Bill 2138 to build so-called middle housing did pass. There were several other bills that passed related to housing. Not all of what the governor wanted, but what progress did you see in the housing arena during this session?
We're very proud of the work that we did in housing this past session. That remains a priority for the communities that we represent, which means it remains a priority for us as legislators. We passed a bill to limit rent increases for manufactured or for mobile homes, and we know that for a lot of folks that purchase homes, that is one of the most accessible, affordable options. And so we limited rent increases there. We also made investments in supporting down payment assistance. We've heard a lot over the last several years about the lack of access to home ownership for many folks. And so we really wanted to make sure that we could make those investments in that support for folks to purchase homes, but also make sure that we are investing in the building of homes, which we recognize is one of the issues that we have come across over the last several years when it comes to affordability.
Only got a couple minutes left here, but I want to mention this. You are the daughter of immigrants, although you grew up in Bandon, Oregon. What's your view of the Trump administration's immigration crackdown, especially with Oregon being a sanctuary state?
Well, I got to tell you that a lot of what's going on at the federal government has certainly impacted what we are doing at a legislative level. It feels like the work that we're doing at the Capitol has more urgency than ever, which is why we've invested funds in things like universal representation so that folks have access to legal resources when they need it. We've passed legislation to make sure that folks aren't being discriminated against when it comes to renting a home, for example. That was one of the bills that we passed this past session. So many of these folks are our friends, our neighbors, they're part of the community. And so we want to make sure that we do what we can to make sure that Oregon is a welcoming place.
Senator Campos, thank you very much for being here on Eye on Northwest Politics.
Thank you so much.
Next, a different view of this year's legislative session from the other side of the aisle. House Republican leader Christine Drazan joins me after the break with her take on the transportation bill and Democrat control in Salem. She joins me after the break.